everybody, and welcome to PGS Moving Image Review. I am RM, and of course, I have with me tonight Catherine. Catherine, how are you?
Good.
Okay,
Thanks.
so
It's such a pleasure to have you here to talk about these two films, which were also nominated in the Best Oscar category, Zone of Interest and Maestro. And certainly, Catherine, I don't know how you feel about it, but these two films have gotten a lot of attention. I think I want to start with Zone of Interest, mainly because it's a movie that is still in the theaters right now. It's a movie that a lot of people are walking out and having different opinions and feelings about. And it's not a shock or a surprise to anybody that Zone of Interest is about World War II, and very specifically a family that decided to build a summer home or residence right next to a concentration camp. Essentially, I think that the notion of it, and to be honest with you, I don't even know if it's a true story. It may be a true story, Catherine. I haven't
But
looked.
it's 100% true. I could tell you about it.
Yes. And what is really interesting is I knew what I was expected to see in this, but I'm not quite sure. I mean, I almost look at this film, Zone of Interest, in the way that it's presented, in the shots that are presented, almost like an art film to me because of the manner in which it's done. Obviously, there's a lot of comparing and contrasting in this film, and I think that that was needed to be done in order to explain what's going on. And I'm not going to go ahead and pretend as if people are completely unaware that World War II happened and that the Holocaust happened and that there were soldiers who were responsible for this entire thing. But what I think is really interesting is we're seeing a family, Catherine, a family in this case that's living right next door to a concentration camp. Even saying that verbally says a lot. It resonates a lot, Catherine. And the comparing and contrasting from one side of the wall to another, there's literally a wall that they can touch. And right on the other side, I don't know how close it was, but let's just say for the sake of this film, right on the other side, Catherine, you can see a building jutting above the wall, and that building is where millions of people are being killed, they're being tortured, prisoners are being kept against their will, all sorts of horrible atrocities are taking place literally just a few feet away from where this woman has her vegetable garden, Catherine. And the shots that they're showing is, oh, isn't the garden nice? And then sort of like right over her shoulder is the building, and you can see the plume of this horrific events taking place, of people being literally cremated right next door, Catherine. You can even hear in some instances. And I think, Catherine, it's very interesting that they chose not to actually show any of the people who were victims. They didn't show that. Usually we see a lot of that. In this case, we understand that there are millions of people on the other side suffering during this thing of this peaceful garden shot that has something looming in the background, this element that's just looming literally so close that the soot from people's ashes of these murdered people are getting on them as they're walking around. Catherine, this is just unbelievable, but it's shown in a cinematography way that gets its point across. Even if you're not even listening to this, you can visually see the contrast of what's going on one side of the wall versus another. And I also wanted to say that I watched another show called Criminal Record, which is on Apple TV, and there's an investigator in the most recent episode who said the difference between order and chaos is a glass shield. And I think that certainly we can see the difference between living and dying here is this wall that the family's kind of like ignoring. They want to see it's there. It's ever looming presence. You can't push away from the wall. Even scenes where the children are in a boat going down the river, we see evidence, this overwhelming evidence that the wall cannot block. You cannot block what is going on the other side. You can't put cotton in your ears to stuff the sounds of the suffering. I mean, the imagery in itself is just stunning. And the discussions where the family's kind of just there and the screams, it's really peace on one side and horror on the other. You know, I think it is really interesting that they chose to let us hear this. Sound was so important in this film, but not the sounds that we would expect, and not in the way that it's presented that we were expecting. However, it gets its point across in a very profound way. Um, and I think that to take a film on like this is not an easy task. To go ahead and decide that you're going to go ahead and tackle this particular topic with dignity and doing it in an accurate way, Catherine, it really was alarming the way that we got to see the family's life develop in a day in, day out way, just like any other family, where they have to decide where they're going to live, and the notion of talking about having a promotion and not wanting to move or having to move, contrasted with people who are forced to move against their will, knowing, in some cases, or not even knowing, or fearful about what's going to happen to them and their loved ones. I think, the poster that's right here is sort of a blooming flower, and in the middle there's a darkness, this sadness, this evil that is ever present. But I also like the notion of showing, and I'm trying to pull it up here. I don't know why my computer's not cooperating. Come on, cooperate. Where they have another poster for Zone of Interest, where you can kind of see this, what looks like, for all practical purposes, like they're having a garden party every day. And yet in the background is this evil and, malicious, horrible thing that's going on. And I think that for all practical purposes, none of us were there, but let's say for all practical purposes, this is quite an imagery of an interpretation of what this must have been like to live next to a concentration camp, knowing very well what was going on next door, Catherine. I think that to take this on in this particular way was astounding. And, you can kind of see the family here in some of these pictures. That's not it. That's from the press ones. But I think it's astounding. I think that we get this imagery and this kind of pureness of the family, that they have this idyllic life, and right next door is the most horrific thing you can possibly imagine. Maybe you can't even imagine it. Catherine, what do you think about this film? I would like to hear some of your comments and concerns, and just thoughts about Zone of Interest right now in this moment. Was it a good film?
So, of all the trailers for the Best Picture nominees, this is the one that intrigued me the most, because the trailer is like a montage of, it's like you're taking the whole banality of evil thing and have just raised it to dialed it up to 11. Let's see the most extreme version of that we can. The movie is more or less a collection of loosely connected scenes of them just living their normal life like nothing's wrong. And in that way, it felt more like an art film. Now, I know that it was based on a novel that was published in 2011. The novel, for some reason, changes all the names of the real people. This family is, for the filmmaker decided that he was going to change the names back to who they really were. He looked through their photo albums. This guy here that you have pictured there, that's Rudolf Huss. He's the camp commander at Auschwitz, because that's Auschwitz next door. The filmmaker or director spent 2 years researching this film, and while he was there in Poland, he saw that the house is still there, and it's a private residence now. I don't know who would want to actually live there, but apparently somebody does. And he was, doing some research, and he got permission eventually years later to come back and film. And they built a replica, like exact replica of the house and grounds, on one of the other walls of the camp. So that's the real Auschwitz you're seeing there. That's the real wall, the real barbed wire and the tower that you're seeing. And looking at the original photo albums, he did a painstaking job at recreating the yard and down to the flagstones used and the greenhouse that's there and the house and all that. He used natural lighting, put like hidden cameras in the house so they wouldn't have to have a bunch of crew members going around. And it's like he wanted to make it feel like very real. And when the director was location scouting and stuff back around 2013, he met this 90-year-old Polish woman. And she told a story about when she was 12 years old, she would ride around on her bike at night picking apples from the apple trees and would sneak into the camp because she would easily be able to evade the guards, and she would leave apples for the prisoners and go back. She still had her dress that she wore while she was doing that and still had the bike that she used for that, and she lended both to the movie. So in those scenes, and you see that happening, that's the real bike, that's the real dress. And that admittedly was done in a very artistic way because it was like black and white, but not traditional black and white, that really heightened, like eerie sort of version. So you're watching this movie and it's like, okay, so they did a painstaking job at recreating the reality of it. And the only central conflict for the characters is that he finds out, the husband, that he's going to get reassigned to Berlin. And he knows his wife isn't going to want to hear this, so he decides to wait to tell her until this garden party, thinking it'd be easier to break the news. And she's like, oh, well then, oh, you need to call Himmler. I'm not going to, I already did. He's not going to do anything. Call Gorman. I did. He's not going to do anything. You need to call Hitler. No, that's ridiculous, which it is. But then she's like, well, my job is raising the kids. Your job is taking care of this. So you go. And he couldn't. And he looks at her totally flabbergasted. He can't believe that she doesn't want to go with him. And it's like, hello, what's going on the other side of the wall? And it's just the level of complete disconnect for what's going on there. And the most interesting part of the film for me was when his mother-in-law shows up, the wife's mother. And she's surprised that their house is like literally sharing a wall with the camp. Now she knows what they're doing there. She's not offended by it. She even mentions sort of sheepishly at one point that she wonders if this Jewish woman she used to be a housekeeper for is still on the other, is there, which is how evil this lady is. And they're sitting there talking, oh, you've done well for yourself, honey, and that kind of stuff. But at night, when confronted with the reality of it and seeing all the smoke and fire and flames and hearing all the screams, she's like completely, it's almost like the air has been sucked out of her lungs. Like she can't take it. And so the next morning, she's just gone. She left a note, but we don't see what the note says, only that the daughter's upset by it. And you can see that the daughter's in a bit of denial as well, that they're literally right on the fence, like literally. And so it's just kind of, you're watching all those scenes like, okay, they're evil. The mother had a bit of a problem where she couldn't face the reality of it. But I thought it was odd narratively when the film suddenly shifts to the husband going to Berlin, because it seemed to me like the wife was more or less the main character through much of the film. But when he goes to Berlin and you're seeing him like, checking out that lady's poodle and acting like such a normal guy, and they're talking about, the actual science behind the crematoriums and the gas chambers and all that kind of stuff. And you can tell he's lonely because his family's not with him. And the last time they cut back to the house is for this random scene of his older son carrying the brother into the greenhouse against his will, almost like he's deliberately emulating shoving somebody into the gas chamber, which is kind of what he's doing, because the real eldest son that character is based on would get a slingshot and shoot at the prisoners from the wall. Now, they didn't show that in the movie. And so it's like, okay, that was an odd scene. And I particularly thought it was surprising when the film flashes forward to the modern day and you see the museum workers. And that's the first time you get to actually see inside the camp. And of course, the museum workers are not fazed by this anymore because they do this every day. And to me, I mean, it had this unintentional effect of, it's like almost their dusting and vacuuming and cleaning is almost as banal as what these people were doing next door. Obviously, it's a different thing. And that's actually the last shot of the movie right there when he's kind of standing in the hall and it's all dark. And I'm like, this is very much an art film because there's no real story here. It's just like you're watching these people. And yeah, it was a true story because, again, the house is still there. We've seen the photo albums. And for those who don't know, in one of the rare instances of poetic justice, when he was found guilty of war crimes, not only did they sentence him to death, but they decided to send him back to Auschwitz, and they hanged him in a gallows that they built next to the gas chamber, which he designed. And I thought, okay, that's nice right there. I don't know what happened to the wife. I was never able to find through my research what became of her, but one of the grandkids has been convicted 13 times of defrauding the Holocaust survivors, because apparently a rule or something was passed that any money that were to be gleaned from telling their story would go to victims. And he's been defrauding them, telling all these wild stories. And his Rudolph's eldest daughter, who's started young in the movie, is chastised this grandson, her nephew, for doing this. Like, oh, he's just a drunk and a deadbeat. He's just trying to get money, blah blah blah. But then she says, oh well, the Nazis got a bad rap. I'm like, are you kidding me? It's like and she's still alive today, by the way. And so it's like the level of evil and just total disconnect from what they're doing is just, it's something to see. But at the same time, watching the movie, it's like, again, it's like an art house film because there's not much of a story. You're just kind of watching a bunch of scenes of how many different ways can we play up the banality of evil trope and get the audience to still sit there and watch it. Which is why at the end of the movie, I mean, the soundtrack was brilliant. They composed the soundtrack over a course of a year before they started filming, and it was really great sound. But as a movie, like, I've seen plenty of other Holocaust films where there's still like a story there, and this definitely a unique approach, but it just felt like a feature-length version of the trailer at the end of the day. It didn't, like, that trailer, yes, it's very shocking when you watch it, but to stretch it into that length of time, it just kind of lost a little bit of its luster. So I ended up giving it 3 out of 5.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Catherine. This definitely has an art film feel to it. So much thought was taken into showing certain backgrounds. They're at the dinner table, there's Auschwitz, they're in the garden, there's Auschwitz. They're on the river, you can see, plumes of smoke coming from Auschwitz. So a lot of it was made in a certain manner in order to demonstrate that the picture you're seeing is not as bright and cheerful and happy as it's being depicted, this family life. It's almost like they didn't really have a full family life because they knew the way that they were living was wrong. And also,
no, I don't think they knew the way they were living was wrong. They were all in. They had no concerns whatsoever. None at all. That's how evil these people. I mean, the look he gives his wife when she suggests that they should just, oh, you go to Berlin and we'll stay here. Like, he's completely beside himself that she wouldn't want to come with him. How can we separate the family? It's like, hello, motherfucker, what's going on the other side of the wall? And and it's like it's just that type. Like, she clearly didn't care. It's like even the mother was like, yeah, she was bothered by the fact that they were that close, and yeah, she was bothered when like faced with the reality of it. But nobody else in the house had that problem. Not even the kids who are hearing all the screams and the gunfire right over the fence. I mean, there's got to be something wrong with you at that point, even for a child to be hearing these screams and gunfire, all this stuff all the time, and to not be bothered like it's just a normal thing. And the fact that the kids, again, even to this day, say, oh, we Nazis got a bad rap, it shows how delusional they really are. So I disagree. I don't think they have any inkling that they're doing anything wrong. Like, the role that Sandra Huller plays is great because she's just trying to preserve this like idyllic life, and it's like anytime somebody gives a hint that there's something not normal going on, she's in total denial about it. Even when the other Polish girls come in who are the housekeepers and they don't want to talk and they don't want to say anything, and she doesn't interact with them at all, and she just kind of ignores just the overt weirdness of these housekeepers coming in like utterly petrified, trying to clean up or do whatever. Like, these people are like evil incarnate. That's just, oh god, it was horrible.
Well, that is very interesting. And Sandra Huller is having quite a year, as I mentioned to you before. She's also the star in Anatomy of a Fall, which has also been nominated for Best Picture Oscar. And I don't know how often that happens, Catherine, because Anatomy of a Fall, as we mentioned earlier, won the Palme d'Or. And this film won, I don't know whether it's the second runner-up, but it did win the Grand Prix at Cannes as well. So for her to be in two films, starring in two separate films, two very different films, and to be that are both nominated for an Academy Award is quite astounding and quite an accomplishment for her.
Yeah, I don't know how often that's happened where you have arguably the lead actor in two separate movies, both being nominated the same year for Best Picture. That's got to be rare. I don't know if that's ever happened before.
Yeah, and the roles couldn't be any more different in each case, as far as I'm concerned. Two different time periods. She's I just really think that she has proven herself, whether she wins or not. She has proven herself that this woman is a fantastic actress and can be quite versatile when it comes to the roles that she's playing as well. And the other thing I was going to say is, although we can't see a lot of the other people who are starring in the role, it did look it felt as if now, in addition to it looking like an art film, it did feel like you were going back in time to that time period. And they did a good job of showing us that era. It felt quite authentic. It did not feel like it was a different time period. It looked as if we took some kind of time machine and went back to that era. And that also was quite terrifying and as well. And the other thing that I was going to say is I think that this approach was good to take in a sense because, I think there are different ways to convey what's going on in a situation. And sometimes there's a lot of, I guess, hints or clues that you can put into a movie, and you don't have to verbally say, well, you know what's next door? Like, you don't have to say that to get your point across. It can be done in a way that's masterful. It is a beautiful looking film, despite the subject matter, which is horrifying. It's a beautiful looking film. I think they did a great job in regards to costuming and everything of that nature. And we do see a lot of the machinations of how this entire thing was pushed, and just absolutely terrified so many millions of people. We got to see a lot of the workings, in a sense, with this family and this father and his role in that. And that scene where you talked about, where he gets the promotion um, to do different operations. We know that he was involved in moving millions of people to the camp, and the realization of hearing it, kind of like, I would say, at the dinner table, maybe not at the dinner table, but at the dinner table for a family, or in a boardroom, or we know these conversations took place. We know that stuff happened and occurred, and it isn't always easy to give that an approach or a way, or explaining it in a different manner. I think a lot of people will look at this film, and a lot of those images will be like burned on their mind. They're not going to be able to forget it. You cannot forget these images, Catherine, because they were done, beautifully done. But boy, what a symbol. You're not going to walk out of that theater forgetting what you have seen. You won't. You can't. I think that might be one of the strongest elements of this film, is that you can't erase these images. And I'm almost thinking, if we see photographs of these places, let's say we've seen them in the 40s, we see them in present day, but these might be some of the most harrowing photographs, because we are, of course, witnessing it in real time. And they're very careful to um have respect towards that reality of having to recreate these experiences of individuals who have passed. I think that difficulty, certainly they've met that challenge. It didn't feel artificial. It felt very real. That felt very real, that something horrible was going on the other side of the wall, Catherine. And I have to give them credit for doing that in a way that came across realistic and was respectful as well. So I can't ever forget the image of that garden, and right as she's walking through. I can't forget that. That's always going to be in here, and I'm always going to remember that. But I also think that it is mastery to be able to create that. As you said, Catherine, they put so much time, effort, and care into making this look unbelievable. So it is true that perhaps the storyline is not up to par. But will they win for anything? Because I don't think it's going to win Picture of the Year, Catherine. I'm convinced Oppenheimer is going to get that. But will it? What do you think? What kind of award could a film like this get? Cinematography? What?
The cinematography, well, sound design especially. Cinematography, if it's I didn't check to see what else it was nominated for, but production design would be another one. If you compare it to the original photographs, it's spot on, and that those would be the ones there. Yeah, and I mentioned before, now that I've seen both roles, I would say Sandra, from acting perspective, was definitely better in Anatomy of a Fall. But so here are, the sound design, the cinematography, and the just the production design was really good. But it just, the whole banality of evil thing from a narrative standpoint, I felt that shock value kind of wore off after 20 minutes, because you're seeing the same kind of stuff, and then it just kind of just keeps having other versions of the same kind of thing that just goes on for like another hour and 20 minutes or so until you shift to Berlin, where it has a little more of that. And then the last conversation he has with his wife is when he's calling her, expressing how excited he is that they went along with his blueprint plan for the new gas chamber or whatever. And so it's like, okay, this guy's out there. But I also wasn't sure artistically what to make of the final shot, because we know he's lonely there in Berlin. We know he's happy that his work has been respected and acknowledged, because he was excited enough to call his wife about it. But after they flash forward to show the museum workers at the camp, they deliberately flash back to him, and he's come down the stairwell in that same administrative building, And it's almost like he feels alone. Like it seems after hours. There's not very many lights on. There's nobody around. There's no more sound. And he's sort of looking around, and it's like, I'm not sure exactly what they want us to think at this moment. I know that he wrote 2 letters 5 days before his execution. He wrote 2 letters. One was written to his son, and the other to his wife. And he basically told them about the dangers of don't take everything, like don't drink the Kool-Aid. Like what we taught was wrong. It was horrible. We should have asked questions. We shouldn't have just gone along with this, that kind of stuff. And it's not like he was just writing that as to get past Allied censors, so that way the rest of the letter, like that's literally all the letters each had to say. And so it's like, okay, that's kind of interesting. It reminded me of another incident in the Pacific where there was an incident of torturing and killing and cannibalizing some American POWs, and like not even the most superior officer was in charge on the island of doing this, but because he had the most boisterous personality and was a drunk, they just kind of went along with it because he was, the one beating the drum, so to speak. And yet at the war crimes trial, he was the only one who expressed any genuine remorse by it. And he said, well, no, it was the imperial system, the whole imperial Japanese system. Like, we're not monsters. That's not who we were before the war. It's like the war and stuff does this to us. And it seemed almost like reading Rudolph's letters when I read that was similar, because it's like, well, this guy's going to be executed. He has no incentive to say anything that the Allies want him to say, but he's telling him don't drink the Kool-Aid, and it's kind of pressuring that anyway, which is kind of weird. But at the same time, this goes beyond just drinking the Kool-Aid, because we see like the shot where he's standing, I guess on an outpost, and you hear all the trains arriving and all the thing, and he's just sitting there watching like it's nothing. And I'm like, this goes well beyond the Nuremberg excuse of, oh, I was just following orders. It's like, this is clearly something else, right? It's like, it's not just that you were like brainwashed. Like, this is clearly on another plane of evil that we haven't seen. But I just noted that parallel when I remember reading those letters. Granted, they don't feature the letters in the movie. They don't feature the executions. They just want you to watch and see. And the reason they call it the zone of interest is that's what the Nazis would refer to as the various camp locations, zones of interest, because they were so secretive about it, because they didn't want the Allies finding out. Because there were even Allied reconnaissance missions as early as 1941, I think, which photographed Auschwitz, and they could tell it was like a prison camp or something, or a barracks, but they couldn't tell. It's like, well, it doesn't look like it would be a prison camp for soldiers because it's way too out of the way, but it's also huge. Are those barracks for soldiers? Like, they couldn't really tell what it was until later on in the war, because they wouldn't even have thought that would be how evil that it would, get to. And that's why Nazis would refer to things like zone of interest. They were trying to keep things on the down low, because they were, as evil as they were still aware of how revelations about what they were doing could piss other people off and exacerbate their problems, which eventually, of course, it did, which was good, because then they got wiped out.
Yeah, and for all practical purposes, Catherine, for an individual who's going to see this film, the average person who's going to see this has not done as much research, let's say, as you and I have done. Actually, I haven't done any research in regards to this particular film, but even as much as you have done for the film, I think that it is wonderful that it was made, and that it does certainly give us a perspective that, and this may not be entirely correct, but they were trying to give you the perspective from the family. And so if you were in that garden with them, which a lot of the perspectives were, or if you were that man, this is what you saw. And, the reality of what that perspective actually is versus what they may have convinced themselves it was.
Well, I remember seeing a similar scene in a documentary where the documentary was called The Act of Killing, where they go to Indonesia to interview all the people who killed the communists, but not just the communists. They went after all their political opponents in the savage murders that they committed to take over. And one of the guys he interviews he's got a position of some political power, and he's showing off all this stuff in his house. And it's clear that he stole all this stuff from the people that they murdered and systematically wiped out. And he's showing off how rare and beautiful these items are. And it's basically like, like the scene in the movie when the kids are looking at the gold teeth. And it's the same thing. This guy is showing off all the jewelry and all the stuff, the expensive items that he stole from the people that they murdered. Like, it's just a normal thing. And he said it's almost, and a friend of mine who saw both movies, he says it's almost like you're watching a documentary, a regular video about people who don't know they're evil, like the zone of interest. It's like you're watching, like, yes, it's literally refers to what the Nazis would call the concentration camp areas. But from a movie's perspective, from an audience, the zone of interest for us isn't the camp, because we know everything that's going on there. It's this house. And how are you living this normal life? Like completely, like how are your kids not bothered by all the screams and everything that goes on next door every day? And the idea that it is like you're just watching these people live their life. At no point that I ever identify with any of them or care about any of them. But it's like you're just watching a slice of life movie about people who don't know they're evil. And I felt the same thing, except the act of killing was an actual documentary, so you're seeing the real actual people. With here, it's like a recreation, but it's the same type of idea.
It certainly is, Catherine. And I think, if anything, it is worth a watch. I think people who are interested in films and making films like this certainly should watch it, and we'll learn quite a few things about certainly having a what I would call a nice aesthetic when you're trying to show different elements that are contrasting. Literally, the perspectives were perfect and spot on and well thought. And my favorite one was the dinner table scene where if you look out the window straight ahead, Catherine, you could see at one of the buildings of Auschwitz. I loved that one right there, amongst many others. But that one, I certainly thought the angle was placed in a particular manner for you to see that it was always looming, no matter what angle, or at least the perception they were trying to give in the film, no matter what angle they were at, it was literally right there. So I think that they did a good job with that. And it's not going to win Best Picture. I don't believe it will. I think we all know Oppenheimer's going to win that one. However, kudos to this actress again, who has just been having a sparkling year. If we still had hard copy magazines, Sandra Hüller would be on every single magazine, gracing, everything, because she'd be pretty much the it lady, the it actress right now. Maybe not in Hollywood, but I guess in Europe. Catherine, has she been as popular on this side of the pond?
I don't know. I hadn't honestly heard of her before seeing both these films, but I did note, like you, that man, this is got to be one of the first times that, like, pretty much the lead actor, the lead performer in two different movies gets both nominated for Best Picture the same year and wins the top two prizes for them at Cannes. Like, that's not, that's got to be unheard of, So, but like you, I don't think that this is going to win Best Picture. I don't think Anatomy of a Fall will either. I didn't check to see what else was. I know the director was nominated. I don't think he'll win it either, because again, it's an interesting art film, but it's more like conceptually. It's like you have to know everything that's going, because if you're just watching it, it's like, okay, I'm watching it, but it's like one shock value type scene after another. And for me personally, it's like I kind of wore out the shock kind of wore out after a while, because I kind of get it, because to me there's always a banality of evil that goes along with these types of films. They just took it to a different artistic level by saying, let's put it right on and it just shocked me when I was researching this, and the director said that the real place is still there, but there's people living there. I'm like, why would you want to live that next to the, like, unless it's the person who runs the museum, maybe. But even then, it's kind of creepy that you're living in the house where these psychos were. Because I do notice in the film that the mother is. I was waiting to see if she was going to break, because again, you could tell the people that come in there are kind of. Some of them, I mean, the mother was the one who noted the most how odd it was, how close they were, but others were kind of like when the mom's like, the wall right there, she's like, oh, don't worry, the ivy will grow over it. We got the plants coming. Like, it's just almost like she's trying to put a barrier between it too, but she's like, oh, this is so idyllic. And it's like, are you going to snap at some point, or are you just, or is this like a legit excuse and you're just legit not bothered by it? It's like, I wasn't sure. And then that's why I was so surprised when the film just breaks away and doesn't return to her, because she seemed like such a powerful, performer in this story, to not have an ending and to not, because they didn't have intertitles at the end saying what became of them. And in my research, I couldn't find anything about what happened to the wife.
Yeah, I'm glad that you went and looked to see what happened to these people. And it is a film filled with a lot of WTF moments, because it's meant for you to have that, and that might be what it does best, as I said before. And Catherine, we have this. Any other comments about Zone of Interest before we go on to Maestro?
I think it's worth seeing at least once. I think the soundtrack for me, even more than the images, was really striking. It was so well done. Not just the soundtrack of what's going on over the fence, but the weird sound. Like, you hear the sound in the trailer, almost like that seahorn, or like, what the heck is that? And like this guttural type sound. And you only hear it a few times in the movie. But when you hear it, it is so creepy. And it's like, okay, that's really good. That's why I think that could be up for best sound. Or if it is up for best, I can't remember if it is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is. Because I know the Oscars are kind of, or actually for sound it should be, and it wouldn't be for score, because they don't nominate scores, which are comprised primarily of natural sounds. But because they did at one point revoke a nomination or rescind a nomination because of that a few years ago. But yeah, I think everybody should see it once, and it's definitely an art film. But when I compare it to other Holocaust films, it's like, yeah, there's the novelty that you put it there. But for me, it's like I don't feel I need to watch the whole hour, 40 minutes of it again. It's like I kind of get it. So
yeah, and I think, you know, they did have to be very careful. I think when you talk about the number of times that it's placed or the number of times that you see certain things, there's a reason why in certain films where they might only show the entrance once, you know, and they may not show the entrance 3 or 4 times in the film for whatever reason. However, this really was certainly an achievement by this production team. It really did come together remarkably well. So I have to give them that. And Catherine, let's talk about Maestro. Um, I have to admit that I have great expectations for this particular film. Of course, this is one of the greatest composers, American composers that I know of, and many people know of, Leonard Bernstein. And I think that the idea that Bradley Cooper, he directed this film, he made this into such a project. It's really something he did out like a passion project, right, Catherine? I can't hear you. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Catherine.
yeah, I just read an article in Variety about that where he was saying that it was a passion project, but that he was kind of surprised and sort of upset that so many people don't really know Leonard Bernstein in America. But this movie is a huge misfire if he wants them to know anything about it. It's like your movie's called Maestro and it has nothing really to do with him being a conductor. It's like, once again, like Zone of Interest, I would compare it. It's like a series of loosely connected scenes. And the first one is about the banality of evil, and this one it's about like his relationships. And there's a few scenes of him kind of, being very arrogant and pontificating about art and stuff like that. Like a lot of the black and white scenes was both him and Carey Mulligan just, oh darling, and stuff like that. That was just, it was so hard to watch. But I'm like, I'm waiting for the moment to kick in where we're really gonna see him conducting these things and the brilliance and it never really happens. It's just like, again, some scenes with his gay lover, and then some scenes with his wife, and a few others, and then a couple flash forwards to the interview that's going on, that the documentary, whatever, that's being made about it. But he's usually pontificating in a way that, like, even art critics will say, all this kind of pompous stuff. But we rarely get to see his process or understand, even contextually, how he was so much better than all the other composers or considered that. Like, a movie doesn't really tell us anything about why or how he's this great composer. It's just like, here he is, and here's a few days, various times in his life with his lovers and wife. So,
Yeah, and you make such a good point with this. I think what I wanted to see from this film or film about him was kind of like what they did with uh there's a film called Yankee Doodle Dandy, and it's about George M. Cohan. And in the film, you don't really learn very much about George M. Cohan's personal life. Yes, of course, there was the 3 Cohans and all this sort of stuff. We know that. But more importantly, we learn the process of how he became sort of, for his time, such a great American songwriter, and even important during World War One and maybe even World War Two, with songs like "Over There." And I certainly was expecting to hear "New York, New York, a wonderful town." Like we did hear a glimpse of it, and I was quite shocked. I knew we were not going to have a normal film, Catherine, a normal biopic, was when it started in the beginning, where you heard somebody was out sick. He runs out or is playing bongos on his lover's ass. That's how I knew that this film was not going to be what I was expecting, because they wanted us to see that scene. They wanted us to see him, tapping some guy's ass. And I understand from a directorial point of view, that's what he was going for. But sadly, Catherine, anybody who watches this isn't going to know, let's say, even the top 10 songs by this man who had so many hits, really shaped a lot of the American Songbook, which is what they hint. And I thought, yes, of course he's going to be in the American Songbook. Are we going to hear any of those songs? Are we going to see any of these musicals? Are we going to see any of the, thing? And like, wow, Mr. Bernstein, that was a great hit. We don't know if you can come back. And he's like, yes, I can come back. I can do it again. And then you get to see like the billboards where it has this musical and that musical and that musical. No, we didn't see any of that.
Yeah,
We saw what was a relationship and his relationships, as you said.
Yeah, nothing about how he composed any of the famous works. No list of any of those famous works. It's just we're watching this. It's like, okay, the makeup job for when he's older is really great. Like that's really spot on. But but other than that, I mean, Carey Mulligan just runs laps around him in terms of performance. She's so good in this movie. I know this just feels like Oscar bait. Like which is why it was odd reading it was a passion project. It's like, well, if it's a passion project for you wanting other people to know about this guy and the fact that not only do people not know his name, but they don't even know the works he composed, like most people don't, then why, like to your point, why isn't that featured in the movie? It's like you said, you start with playing bongos on some guy's ass. It's like, okay, it's kind of funny, but it's like, okay, you're just doing these random relationships. Like this has nothing to do with, like, I watch it and it's like I have no hint of what makes him good again compared to other conductors, because I haven't admittedly seen many biopics about conductors, and so it's like, okay, it's his relationship, but are we gonna, and how he's now having affairs with the students, but are we gonna get anything about his compositions? No. I mean, there's the one that he is composing at his house that you see later on, but even then, you see little bits of him writing it, but we don't really get any hints of what's inspiring it or how he's going about that, And it does jump around in time quite a lot, but just over these various relationships, which if they had been able to tie these certain personal events to certain songs, like if they had served inspiration for some of those things, okay, then that would make sense, because you're showing us, a lot of people draw from their own life, real world inspiration, but we're not seeing that. It's just a series of, again, loosely connected scenes about various relationships in his life. And because the movie's called Maestro and they're telling you, oh, this must be important because this guy must be important because they're making a movie about him. Well, that's a fourth wall breaking thing. There's nothing in the body of the movie itself to tell us that this guy is the amazing conductor. It's like at one time they mentioned that, oh, you're being ranked among the greatest American conductors of all time. But if you're not going to show us that or really demonstrate that, and there's not much of a story here, then what exactly are we doing, and how is this conducive to educating younger generations as to who this man was and the works that he composed and how brilliant it is?
Yeah, and here's Sarah Silverman, who was also in the film, and I thought she was great. And this entire group of obviously he comes from a Jewish family, and they do talk about him being Jewish and trying to be accepted, and how difficult it is for him to get on the stage and things of that nature. Which really is, I guess, a 5-minute conversation, but it felt like it dominated a good portion of the film unnecessarily, and focused away also, Catherine, from his ability to be lauded. Apparently, he was quite lauded in his time, but you don't necessarily get that in feeling from it in the film. It's not till the very end where they're like, "Oh, he's so great, he's so wonderful." I didn't really get that. I didn't feel as if they even made a point of saying how impactful he is in America even. On the Town was a big musical hit. I think it is really interesting. You and I watch Turner Classics, or so many of the films from that era, and I see a lot of his work that's been made into film and a lot of his influence. But beyond that, no one ever really does talk about this, him. And I think this would have been such a great opportunity to hear more things, more work, more of his process, as you said, Catherine. But, we're kind of more learning a little bit about his circle rather than him. If you wanted to know what it was like to be around, who was around him and what was going on, that's what you'll find out. If you want to find out more about him, this is not necessarily the film for that. So I think in regards to recreating that time period, my mother watched it with me, and of course, my mother is in her 80s, and of course, this time period is recreated perfectly, and she immediately is like, "Oh, I'm like, "It's Maestro, it's about Linda Bernstein." She's like, "Oh," like she really loved the notion of it, and it was almost like you were going to a cocktail party during this time period in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, and you got to kind of see all these different cocktail parties that were going on, and well, what's going on in his life now? Oh, well, this person, he's no longer dating this person. It was kind of, that style of a film, and really just a disappointment in the sense of learning anything about the fact that he was even a composer. I think a lot of the focus was not on his brilliance. Even we don't even know, after seeing this, that he was brilliant, Catherine. We don't know. We just know
Yeah.
that he had these experiences.
Like you said, at the very least, Yankee Doodle Dandy, that's a 4-star movie. It still holds up today. And you at least can follow the story linearly and understand kind of how he came into that popularity, and even feature some of the songs that he wrote, so you kind of get the story. Here, there's none of that. It's a nonlinear story with these ridiculously pompous artistic things. It's like, okay, but it's easy for you to be pompous and say things decades after the fact when you're being interviewed about it. I want to see, like, at the time that he was actually composing these things, what he was thinking, like what was going through his mind and how he went about this. And again, like you said, there's nothing to be gleaned here about this guy from watching. It's like, yeah, it may be a very accurate representation of aspects of his personal life, okay, but that doesn't really inform me. But if they're not even going to pair the songs to certain events in his life, like maybe some of his famous works were inspired by some of these relationships. Well, okay, then maybe you should feature some of those works in there and pair it to make it clear to the audience that that's what's going on. And they're not. And it's just like, I felt kind of lost. I felt similarly when I watched the David Fincher film Mank, which is kind of dependent on you having seen Citizen Kane and knowing the story of the making to understand all the references, how that real life storyline inspires the movie that the guy ends up writing. But if you don't know that, you're just kind of lost watching all these random scenes of a very loose story that's not even much of a story. And that's kind of the same thing with this. It's like, it requires you to already know pretty much everything about him, and it's just so strange that if Bradley Cooper's goal was to educate people about him and everything he did, then I mean, it'd be one thing if you want to just tell about his personal life and he were already well known, then okay, then this would be a fine movie for that. But if you're going to title it Maestro, then clearly it's not meant to just simply be about his personal life. You're trying to showcase the brilliance of this man and his work, and it's not coming across at all in the movie. And thus, at the end of the day, it just kind of feels like Oscar bait. I mean, I know it's not, because he says it's a passion project, unless he's just saying that. I mean, I don't know. It just, again, I saw it. I gave it 2.5 out of 5 because I thought the cinematography was great. Carey Mulligan is brilliant, but as a movie and even as a story and it doesn't even fulfill its mission statement of telling us about that. So, and I was just kind of bored watching it. So towards the end, when it starts being more linear with her and the final days of his wife's life, that was really good. But other than that, I just felt that it was a big misfire.
Yeah, and I'm almost wondering, although I'm sure this is not the case, but one could say it's almost even a parody. Like he's this great maestro, but he can't even get his personal life together. One could argue that, there's points where he's in the film and he's running up to couples saying, well, I slept with your mother and father. And I'm like thinking to myself, unless this is the swingers club where your children aren't around, you probably wouldn't be saying things like that in front of children, right? You those are private, intimate moments. You don't say that in front of, children in front of you. It was, kind of like said to show, I guess he had a sense of freedom, but at the same time, it didn't necessarily reflect on his ability to be a maestro. We only see one scene where he's with some guy who said it's some summer stock, I'm guessing, maybe in Montauk somewhere. And he's trying to conduct a symphony, I guess, or lead people in the symphony. And the guy who he's training or who's being observed by him is very insecure and not confident, only to find out that he's dating this kid. It doesn't quite fit into, sort of behavior that I would kind of see as anything to really be necessarily that proud of. It's like he's chasing after Oppenheimer, David Oppenheimer, in a scene where, he's shaking uncontrollably. And I'm like, how's this a celebration of his relationships? Like, is slapping somebody on the ass a celebration of your relationship? You know what I mean? Like, is it? You know, just from a point of, you know, cinematography point of view, is that a celebration of a relationship if a character slaps another one on the ass? So I have to ask these questions only because I understand if that was the approach that they want to go on, but then let it actually be celebratory. Let it be where the relationship is so amazing and he's in a field of flowers and he's on a elated high, and let us see those high and happy moments. A lot of this shit was dour, Catherine. A lot of it was very dour. What do you think?
Yeah, it was. And if that's how his personal life was, okay, so be it. But you still have to connect that to why this guy is such a, this brilliant maestro. And again, it's not. And I admittedly didn't really know anything about his personal life. So I'm juggling it. It's like, okay, I'm trying to figure out, for some reason, this segment's in black and white, this segment's in color. I was trying to figure out what the logic was there. But it's like, okay, so you're having him being playful, like you said, the bond with the guy's at, okay, whatever. Like, okay, funny, haha, fun little relationship. But how is this telling me anything about why this guy's a maestro? Or, it's like, you're just telling me the personal life of a guy who happens to be a conductor. It's like, it almost felt like his profession was completely inconsequential to the story. Like, it just, that's what he happens to be doing. And it's just like, I don't really get it. And it'd be one thing, I guess, if this film was specifically made for people who already know his life story front to back, or people who knew him. And yeah, they'll watch it and they'll get it. But for a mainstream audience, if your whole mission statement is you want people to know him and respect him and all this kind of stuff, well, then you didn't really do that, because you're just seeing, okay, a guy who's got a bit of a tumultuous personal life. Okay, a lot of people have tumultuous personal lives, but again, like, a beating the dead horse here. What does that have to do with being a brilliant conductor, and how does that inform us about that? And it's just not. And then, like I said, some of those black and white moments just felt a bit exaggerated in terms of the performances. That was a bit sometimes cartoonish, and then it picks up in the color version segments a bit better in terms of the acting. Like I said, oh darling, all that silly stuff in the black and white was just too much. I'm like you, I thought, is this supposed to be a parody? I can't really tell. Like, it's a bit too cartoonish and silly at times. But it just, oh god, such a misfire. I don't know why. And I saw that Scorsese and Spielberg's names are amongst the producers. I'm guessing they may have donated some money, because, I've heard of there being an issue of too many cooks in the kitchen, but come on, the final product of a Scorsese Spielberg produced movie should not be this bad. I know everybody's got their bad day at the office, but this, I'm sorry, this does not fly for me in any way. It's just no.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, essentially, like, this picture, where you see the movie poster where it's being promoted, kind of gives you this fascination. It looks like maybe a musical, or Carrie Mulligan's looking up with hope, and he's looking up with kind of this fantasy. And in the end of the day, this film was nothing like that. You didn't have any kind of hope or fantasy. The only hope or fantasy you had was where you had that short 5-minute on the town musical segment in the theater, and that was it. There was no kind of like fantasy buildup, or how he had imagery in it, and how amazing it was to be a creator in this. I think we missed out on a lot of those fun things that we should have had, even like that we could have had. God knows there were dream sequences in all of these films and musicals. It's hard to believe that out of a man who created amazing music and had such amazing dream sequences, that this is what they wanted to show for him, and not even in a good way. Why not? If you're gonna champion his homosexual life, why not champion it and make it look fantastic? Why not champion it and make it show what an impact he had on all the men he cared about? How about that? And make it a happy, more kind of celebratory version, in opposed to, like, his wife being angry with him, in the end, and this ambiguity about whether she knows or doesn't know. Like, that's not fun to watch that's not entertaining to watch. That's tabloid TV. That's tabloid television.
Right, but if that did actually happen, then that's one thing. But you do need all the other stuff that's not, because the fact that it's non-linear, it's like, okay, we see stuff earlier in his career before he became big and famous, And then we see stuff when he's already famous, and then the stuff afterwards later on when he's like on this pedestal, if you will. But we're never seeing him actually doing any of the things that made him famous or composing any of the things that made him. It's like you're skipping the key aspect of this guy's life story, and it's like, because of the nonlinear nature of it, I didn't really jive with the wife's concerns about whether she knew about what was going on or not. I just didn't really care at that point, because it's like, okay, you're celebrating his relationship with David Oppenheimer, and now you're kind of going back to his wife, and we know that he's kind of romancing his students or whatever. And because there's so many huge chunks of his life that are missing from the movie, I can't really judge his relationship with her, how that's going one way or another, because they're omitting so much information.
Yeah, and even with his professional collaborators, as you said, Catherine, we don't know anything about that either. So all of a sudden he has these collaborations with other well-accomplished composers and creators, and we know nothing about what's happened with that, just that he's working with it or not working with them. You know, they seem more concerned about showing him sitting on the toilet in the bathroom with the seat down than, you know, a lot of things that we could have seen, you know, which you would traditionally see in a story like this with him. I guess you kind of did see him at the piano and doing stuff like that, but it was a huge missed opportunity. So this is another one that is not going to win Best Picture. I
can't believe it even got a nomination. It's like, it's like, why? I don't understand. There's other, like, just because you can nominate 10 films doesn't mean you have to. And maybe look at the international film category, look at the other films from there, which are really good ones too, which could be taking the spots. But definitely not this.
Yeah, Catherine, I'm just so disappointed in that. And I was hoping to actually learn maybe some other scores that he'd done that I was completely unaware of. And of course, I'm still unaware of them because they never covered it. So,
like I said, yes.
Maybe
they'll put it on the film soundtrack because it's not even in the credits.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they didn't even tell us the names of the music while we were watching the damn film, Catherine. They didn't even put it on the, you know what I mean? Like sometimes they'll put it in there. We don't even know what we've heard. I think it was definitely a miscalculation on that part. But Catherine, I think you and I have covered every film that has been nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, and it's been quite an experience seeing everything. I still say, and I'm sure you agree, that Oppenheimer is the slam dunk on this one. I think Nolan Ryan's going to walk out of there with so many Oscars. He's not going to know what to do with himself.
Not Nolan Ryan, that's the pitcher. Christopher Nolan, the director.
I'm sorry, Christopher Nolan part. That's Nolan Ryan. I'm thinking of baseball.
Yeah.
Yes, Christopher Nolan. Sorry, guys. Thank you, Catherine. I think he's going to walk out of there. He's not going to know. Well, he's going to know what to do with himself. But what a feather in his cap to have such an influential film and year, and it's still going, Catherine. It's still being shown in theaters throughout the United States. And I think the demand for that DVD 4K is still on. Catherine, this really is a film that I think changed a lot of things, has had such a global impact on cinema, Catherine. I think that in itself is a second accomplishment for Oppenheimer.
Oh yeah, between theatrical box office and all the physical media selling out as quickly as it did, as well as the digital media, it's already over $1 billion. You know, it broke it in that range. It didn't do it theatrically, but you know, it made $1 billion. And then it just, again, Hollywood should be paying attention. You have a movie that's just a bunch of people talking. You can even do one that's not a period piece, which would save more money, and do it with equally talented actors who aren't going to cost you as much either. And you can still have a great movie. You know, and there's numerous things you could pick up. It doesn't even have to be a true story. You can write a fictional story and tell it in the same way. Like, there's no law that says that just because Christopher Nolan tells stories non-linearly in that way, that nobody else is allowed to do it. It's like other people can do it. I would love to see other types of stories told in that type of dramas told in that type of style. I would think really change it up and break up the monotony of so many other films. But I do know that the one thing Nolan did say is that he wants to do something lighthearted after much lighter than for what he's been doing for his last 3 films.
Yeah, I think he certainly has put all his heart and soul into the film, and it shows. And we saw such stellar performances, not just from Cillian Murphy, but also from Robert Downey Jr., who we expect will likely be recognized as the rest of the cast, seeing so many outstanding performances as well. It's just been so much fun. And I want to thank Lugnut6, who says a huge hug to the awesomely lovely RM. Thank you so much, Lugnuts, and the charming and awesome as well, Catherine.
Thank you, Luck.
Lugnuts, you are amazing. We love to hear such kind words. I want to thank everybody who was here. Slarf reminds me of Guar for some reason, and Daniel Berry Sports highlights, as well as Grubby Don't Play. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. Catherine and I will be back for more movie reviews and so much more this upcoming year. But Catherine, I want to thank you so much for being here to review these two films. Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me at Sly Snide at Letterboxd, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. And you can also find me on the Phantasmagorium Show YouTube channel. We got all sorts of movie reviews there for the Batman movies, the James Bond films, the Spider-Man movies, the Tarantino Rodriguez films, and we're currently reviewing the Fargo TV series. That's been a lot of fun, and that's Thursday nights at 7. And then you can also find me on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel every second and fourth Sunday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific, streaming The Unifying Force, which is a Star Wars talk show where we relate Star Wars to real world philosophy and have a lot of fun there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. And guys, you can always find me on Positive Fandom, where I do all the parlay in the fandom, as well as the Burnettwork and my new channel, Roman Empire Matters. I want to thank everybody for being here. And guys, remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody.